In today's video, we're covering US 50 in California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado, and we're also going to see that Colorado, of course, has some bad signage. At US 50 start at I-80 where it is signed for Reno, we're signed east for Sacramento and South Lake Tahoe. Sacramento is fine on its own here. When we meet I-5 north for Redding, we're now signed east solely for South Lake Tahoe, which you could argue they should sign a suburb like Rancho Cordova or Folsom, but I think it's fine, honestly. When we meet California 89, we're now signed for State Line, Nevada. Just sign Carson City here. I don't know what Caltrans is doing. Here we get a Nevada State Line sign, and this is the best thing we get for a state welcome sign because there is none. When we meet Nevada 207, unlike California, Nevada actually signs Carson City. When we meet I-580, we're now running concurrently with it along with US 395, and we're now signed for Reno and Fallon. Reno is for I-580 and US 395, and Fallon is for US 50. When we leave I-580 and US 395, we're now signed east for Dayton and Fallon. On the mileage sign, we have Dayton in 3 miles, Stagecoach in 16, and Fallon our primary in 53. In Fallon, we meet US 95, and we're now running concurrent with it for Ely and Winnemucca. When US 95 leaves us, we have the exact same control cities as we did earlier. On the mileage side, we have Austin in 104 miles, Eureka in 174, and Ely as our primary in 251. Here we get a Nevada Highway 50, the loneliest road in America sign. In Ely, we meet US 93, and we're now running concurrent with it for Delta and Las Vegas. Delta's for US 50, and Las Vegas is for US 93. US 6 is now joining the mix, and Las Vegas is the place of Pioche. Put Las Vegas back on the sign, and oh, by the way, US 6 is also signed for Delta. On the mileage sign, we have Junction US 93 and 26 miles where it leaves us. Hinkley in 147 and Delta as our primary in 153. When US 93 leaves us, it is signed for Pioche in Las Vegas, and we're still with US 6 east for the Great Basin National Park in Delta. On the mileage side, we have Baker in 35 miles, the Great Basin National Park in 41, and Delta as our primary in 126. This Utah State welcome sign's pretty cool in my opinion, not gonna lie. When US 6 leaves us in Delta, we're now signed for Fillmore. We don't actually go to Fillmore, but Utah 100 will take you there, and this is legit like the best thing you can sign, so just roll with it. On the mileage sign, we have Oak City in 14 miles, Holden in 28, and Fillmore, as aforementioned, it isn't on US 50, but it's our primary in 37 miles. When we meet Utah 100, we're now signed east for Holden. This place has 438 people, just sign Salt Lake City here. After we pass Holden, we meet I-15, and we're now signed for Scipio in Salt Lake City. Scipio is for US 50 and Salt Lake is for I-15, but I think Salt Lake should be on the side by itself due to its size. On the mileage sign, Scipio was on the top line in 10 miles, Provo is the secondary in 85, and Salt Lake is on the bottom line in 130. When US 50 leaves I-15, we're now signed solely for Scipio. In Scipio, we're now signed for 2 I-70, which we don't need for about 30 miles. Salina and Richfield, we don't go to Richfield, but you can get there via numerous state highways that we meet. When we meet Utah's 260, which is one of the highways you take to get to Richfield, we're now signed solely for Salina. In Salina, we now run concurrently with I-70 for Green River. This should say Denver, not Green River. On the mileage side, they at least put Grand Junction on the bottom line at 205 miles, but it still should say Denver. Here we meet US 6 again, west for Price in Salt Lake City, and we're now also running concurrently with it again, along with I-70 still. I feel like this state welcome sign should be a little bit more colorful since it says colorful on it rather than just like a plain brown background on it, but you know, I don't question Colorado's choices. This is where US 6 and 50 leave I-70. However, it's not even mentioned on the exit sign. Only Colorado 139 is. What is CDOT doing here? On the mileage side, Grand Junction is our primary in 16 miles, but it's faster to go back down to I-70, so sign Fruita, then you can sign Grand Junction afterwards. Here we meet I-70 again, signed east for Denver, and we'll still sign for Grand Junction. However, now is a good time to sign it. When US 6 leaves us, we are now signed east for Montrose. This is a bad control city, it should be Pueblo instead. Though right now there are some road closures on US 50, so it isn't the fastest route as of now, but it is under normal circumstances. On the mileage sign, Montrose is our primary in 52 miles, once again signed Pueblo. In Montrose, we meet US 550 signed south for Ouray, and we're now signed east for Gunnison, once again just signed Pueblo. After Gunnison, our new control city is Canyon City, but pronunciation doesn't make sense, but anyways, just signed Pueblo once again. When we meet Colorado 115 in Canyon City, we're now finally signed east for Pueblo. When we meet I-25, we are now concurrent with it. However, this concurrency is unsigned. And also, south for Trinidad, that should be Santa Fe or Albuquerque, not Trinidad. When we leave I-25, we're now signed east for La Junta. In La Junta, our new control city is Lamar in 55 miles. Here we meet US 287 signed north for Lyman. That should be Denver. Anyways, we're now concurring with US 287 southbound for Lamar still. In Lamar, US 287 leaves us, but US 385 joins us and we have no control city. After US 385 leaves us, we are now signed for Syracuse, which is yet again a bad control city, just signed Garden City. And here we are at the Kansas border, so now we're going to turn around and do Westbound. And here's the Colorado State welcome sign again. On the mileage sign, Lamar is our primary in 31 miles. This should be Pueblo, not Lamar. In Lamar, we're now signed for La Junta and Eads. La Junta is for US 50 and Eads is for US 287. Also, this should be Pueblo and Denver, not La Junta and Eads. When US 287 leaves us, it is signed for Lyman. Do I need to say anything? And we're still signed west for La Junta. Again, just signed Pueblo. Here we meet Colorado 194, which will take you to Pueblo via other highways. But anyways, we're now signed for Los Animas. This is where La Junta should be signed. Like, what is this? In Los Animas, we're signed for La Junta again, but now Pueblo should be signed actually, as this is now the fastest way to get there. In La Junta, we meet US 350 again, and we're now signed for Pueblo in 61 miles. We are now concurring with I-25 northbound for Colorado Springs, and this time the concurrency is actually signed. When US 50 leaves I-25, we're now signed west for Canyon City. This should be Grand Junction, not Canyon City. In Canyon City, when we meet Colorado 115, we're now signed west for Salida, once again signed Grand Junction. When we meet US 285, we're now concurring with it north for Buena Vista. I really do not get Colorado pronunciations. Leadville and Gunnison. Buena Vista and Leadville for US 285, and Gunnison is for US 50. Also, this should be Denver and Grand Junction. When US 285 leaves us, we are now signed solely for Gunnison. This should be Grand Junction. On the mileage sign, though, Gunnison is now our secondary in 66 miles, and Grand Junction actually becomes the primary in 188. When we meet I-70 again, we have no control cities at all whatsoever. When we meet I-70 again, but this time we're going to run concurring with it, we are now signed west for Utah. On the mileage sign, though, our control city is Junction I-15 in 242 miles. I do think this is good since there is no significant city I-70 crosses through in Utah. And here we are crossing the state border back into Utah. In Utah, though, Green River is now our primary in 64 miles. Keep it as Junction I-15. When US 6 leaves us, it is now signed west for Price in Salt Lake City. When we leave I-70, we're now signed for Salina. When US 89 leaves us, we're now signed for Delta, which is actually the best thing you can sign. We're now concurring with I-15 for Las Vegas and Delta. Las Vegas is good on its own, but the way they have the sign having Delta on it is fine. When we leave I-15, though, we're now signed for Holden. Put Delta back on the sign. When we meet US 6 again in Delta, we are now signed west for Ely. And here we are back at the border crossing into Nevada. And here's a little bit of a different loneliest road in America sign from the one we saw earlier. When US 93 joins the mix, we're now signed for Ely and Carson City. However, on the mileage sign, Carson City is nowhere to be found, and Ely is on the top line in 26 miles, while McGill is on the bottom line in 38, which is on US 93. When US 6 leaves us, it is signed west for Lund Junction and Tonopah, and we are now signed for Twin Falls and Carson City. When US 93 leaves us, it is still signed for Twin Falls along with McGill, and we're still signed for Carson City along with Eureka. Here we meet I-58 and US 395 signed north for Reno, and now we're running concurrent with them southbound for Minden and South Lake Tahoe. Minden is for US 395 and South Lake Tahoe is for US 50. When I-580 ends and US 395 leaves us, we're still signed west for South Lake Tahoe. On the mileage sign, South Lake Tahoe becomes a secondary and Sacramento is our primary now. This seems good, but by a little bit of digging, this actually isn't the fastest way to get to Sacramento. So South Lake Tahoe should be on the bottom line still. Here we cross back into California, and this is the best thing we get for a state welcome sign, as there is none. When we meet California 89, we're now signed west for Sacramento. Now is a good time for it to be signed. When we meet I-5, we're now signed west for San Francisco. I'm glad they didn't sign West Sacramento here. And here we terminate at I-80 and default onto Westbound, which will lead you to San Francisco. After looking at all of Colorado's bad control cities, these being Montrose, Gunnison, Salida, Canyon City, La Junta sometimes, and Los Animas, let's look at what the control cities should be for the entire route. The control cities for Eastbound should be Sacramento, then South Lake Tahoe, Carson City, Fallon, Ely/Winnemucca, then Ely by itself when US 95 leaves us, then Delta and Las Vegas, then Delta when US 93 leaves us, then Fillmore until you meet Utah 100, then after that signed Salt Lake City, then Scipio when we leave I-15, then Salina and Richfield until you meet Utah 260, then Salina by itself, then Grand Junction, then Loma/Rangery when you leave I-70, then Fruita, then Grand Junction again, then Pueblo, skip over Montrose, Gunnison, and Canyon City, then La Junta, then Lamar, and then finally Garden City, skip over Syracuse. If y'all didn't see the notes I made of a video, this is gonna alter a little differently from what I said, but just go along with it. And for westbound, the control city should be Pueblo, La Junta until you meet Colorado 101 and Los Animas, then Pueblo, then Grand Junction, skip over Canyon City and Salida, then Fruita, Loma, Utah, then don't sign Junction I-15, sign Salt Lake City and Las Vegas, then Las Vegas by itself when US 6 leaves, then when you leave I-70 you can sign Salina, then Delta, then Carson City, skip over Eli, then South Lake Tahoe, then Sacramento, then finally San Francisco. If you enjoyed today's video, please subscribe. I also have other videos on my channel where I cover more US highways, and I also cover interstates and state highways. And I also look into control cities and see if they're worthy of control city status. Anyways, see you guys next time. Bye!